Good evening, Ji. Today we will going to discuss past paper of history of USA year 2018, and we will start from the very first question. If you read out the question or the question paper, you would come across that it was a very difficult paper. However, that's not the case. It was a very easy paper, and first question: what is the variance between treaties of Paris and that of again 1763 and 1783. So while attempting this question, that's question number 2 of the paper, and it says variance between the treaties of Paris in 1763 and 1783, one part, and its significant role. So you have two parts in the question: significant role, and you can say uh, major variances, differences in both the treaties. Now, make sure that there are more than 2 dozen treaties which are known as Treaty of Paris in world history. But here we are specifically mentioning in US history 1763 and 1783. What is the variance in both the treaties? As far as you will write down contextualizing Treaty of Paris 1783, the parties of the treaty, of course, France was the party of the treaty, then Britain was the party of the treaty, then colonial uh, USA, not directly party, but they were also, and the Indians indirectly, both were indirectly direct parties were France and Britain. On the other hand, the Treaty of Paris of 1783, Spain was also part of the treaty, France was also part of the treaty, Britain was of the part of the treaty, and the newly created state of United States of America, they were part of this treaty. So, what are the variances in that treaty specifically? The point is, or you may write 2 to 3 features as well. As far as variances are concerned in that treaty, the point is that 1763 treaty, American people, their true aspirations were not recognized because they wanted to expand, and the royal proclamation by the British king and that treaty, that was a setback for American people. And when we say 1783, the American people's true aspirations were recognized because they wanted freedom, independence from the British rule. So one major variation was this one. Second one, you can say that in 1763, Americans, they were indirect party. In 1783, they were direct party to the that treaty, because 1783 treaty uh, provided Americans with the independence. Another aspect, 1763, Britain, France, they directly engaged in dialogue, while in 1783, Spain was also involved in the process of dialogue because there were few territories in United States, modern United States of America, that belonged to Spain. So Spain was also involved in 1783 treaty. Then 1763, territories were defined, between France, Indians, and Britain, while in 1763, sorry, 1783, United States of America's territories were defined. So these are the major variants in that treaty. You can write, you can also add few more, but I want to provide a basic understanding that how to compare and contrast to two treaties, and then elaborated significant effect on United States of America. Well, as far as the significant effects are concerned, if you see that 1763 treaty, it provided a resentment among people, among American people, because their aspirations were not appreciated. In 1783, there was no such resentment. Rather, it was a joy, happiness among American people because of their independence. And again, since 1763 didn't provide any freedom, no freedom. 1783 provided freedom. Another significant impact of political consciousness versus political destination. 1763 provided political consciousness, and 1783 paved the way towards political destination, independence. America emerged as a country, as a nation state. So you can write 3 to 4 more points, but I wanted to just communicate that how to compare those two treaties and significant impact of political, uh, their idea of independence, their political struggle was recognized. It was a source of happiness and joy. It formation of a nation. 1763 provided the consciousness, and 1783 successful culmination of America emerged as a nation. The most important significant aspect of 1783 treaty. But that nation, the seeds of the nation was sowed in 1763 treaty when they were not even asked for, or their uh, aspirations were not included in that treaty. So simple it is. It was a very easy question. Those who have studied uh, colonial era and War of Independence in detail, they can easily write it down. There is no such issue while attempting this question. You may come up with the 1 or 2 quotations as well. It's up to you. Question number 3 of the paper, and here is question number 2. It says that why did American colonists criticized the Stamp Act of 1763? Criticism by Americans on Stamp Act. Okay, this is one part of my question. And what was the Stamp Act crisis and its repercussions? What was the crisis, Stamp Act crisis, and its repercussions? Okay, sometimes examiner asks a question, and he creates such a, you can say, puzzle, whereby you you would think that when I'm criticizing Stamp Act, then why to write separately about Stamp Act crisis? Let us attempt this question, and then you will realize it doesn't mean that you have to write the reaction first and then the crisis later on. You may write the Stamp Act crisis first. I would start this question by saying that Stamp Act provided the basis for agitational politics in American people. I would start from here and then I will further write further sentences related to prove this statement. How? Stamp Act. What was Stamp Act? I will write 3 to 4 lines on Stamp Act. That was basically a bid by the British to collect maximum British currency out of the American territory and to pay those British soldiers who were stationed in American territories. And also they wanted to regulate the undocumented economy. So I would write 3 to 4 lines, 5 lines on Stamp Act, and then I would come up with the reaction. The reaction over Stamp Act created a crisis situation. It was the reaction over Stamp Act that paved the way towards the slogan "No taxation without representation." It was the reaction to the Stamp Act that gave birth to the idea of, Sons of Liberty. You must have an understanding of these ideas, otherwise you would not be able to attempt this question. So, particularly in the North, demonstrations, public property was endangered, threatened, आग भी लगा दी कई जगहों पे. Under these circumstances, now here you can see that the crisis and the criticism by the people, you are writing it in a single header. So sometimes it doesn't mean that you have to write separately, not necessarily, because the essential meaning is same. The crisis emerged out of the reaction by the people. So not necessarily that you would come up with each and every aspect of the question, you would answer that. The crisis, Stamp Act crisis, emerged out of the reaction by the people. The crisis emerged out of the British introduction of the act and the reaction of the people. And what were now the repercussions? The repercussions, of course, a sense of alienation was witnessed among people, that we are not considered as equal citizens as do the British. There was a sense of alienation among the people. It provided a political consciousness among people to think, to rethink whether they are living comfortably under British crown or not. Then further, British reaction in the form of Townshend Act. Townshend Act. You must have an understanding of Townshend Act, because Townshend Act repealed Stamp Act, khatam kar diya, but it also provided legitimacy, since people were demanding no taxation without representation, and Sons of Liberty were asking for the more American representation in British Parliament, and British Parliament is not a legitimate body to pass laws or tax American people. So Townshend Act provided legitimacy to the British Parliament. So situation further aggravated. Coupled with some other acts, it ultimately paved the way towards a general mass mobilization, which resulted into the Declaration of Independence and War of Independence, subsequently resulting into the freedom of United States of America. So this is how you would attempt this question, not necessarily that you will write down separately. The criticism of the Americans and the Stamp Act crisis, it's an interplay of American criticism and the British Act that resulted into a crisis, how that crisis was addressed, and further repercussions. So these two questions were basically not textbook style questions. However, those who have read American history in detail, at least from one book, they will be in a better position to answer this question. Otherwise, people would have written their own notes and their, crammed knowledge, and that's why people score less marks. Common sense is an important tool in an ingredient while attempting a paper. Next question. Now, again, it's a very, very interesting question. He asked for the factors that contributed to the amended status of American women with special reference to modern feminism. Now, since you would come across the word amended status, so automatically first thing that would strike you, that would be the adult franchise of 1910s, when American uh, women were also allowed to vote for the president and stuff like that. But the examiner has asked about the amended status of women, particularly with reference to modern feminism. So you have to write with special reference to modern feminism. And the idea of modern feminism, uh, if you don't know about it, then do not write this question. This particular idea of modern feminism, it started in the United States in 1960s with the base of the this idea modern feminism was that what was the traditional role of a woman in American society. So basically, modern feminism criticized this traditional role, and they came up with new solutions for women. So what were those new solutions? How they criticized, and ultimately their new solutions and criticisms, it definitely helped to raise the status of American women. So you have to highlight the factors that compelled all these developments. So first and the foremost thing was the American economy. American economy immediately after 1945 witnessed a boom. Industrialization, of course, already was there, but largely owing to World War II, your bulk of your industries were making arms, ammunitions. So now they shifted towards civil works, civil commodities, civil goods. So you needed labor, a whole lot of labor, bulk of labor. So unless and until women would not become part of that labor, you would not progress. So the more the opportunities were witnessed, it provided an urge that women should also work, economic opportunities. So American economy, and one can also correlate it that around about in 1939, American GDP was about $200 billion. But when we see in 1960s, American GDP was crossing $500 billion. That's only because of industry started working efficiently, effectively, and the GDP, the women as a labor force, they have played an important role. Now, from where it all started and who who was the formative, you can say, influences, from where this formative influence was derived. pertaining to enhancing the status of women. And that was owing to the first very academic issue that was academically highlighted was Betty Friedan. Betty Friedan came up with the idea of the feminine mistake. Feminine mistake. TI, sorry. Feminine mistake. So she was the first person that she came up with the idea how he raised the questions relating to role of women. Is it the household role only or the child care role of the woman in a traditional society? So he questioned it. And later on, Friedan and her other, colleagues, they came up with the idea of national organization for women. National organization for women. And from that forum, they sought for more and more economic opportunities for women, more and more. And that was an ideal time period because 1960s was also a 60s was also a period whereby the civil rights movements was at its peak. So such feminists in United States of America, they joined hand with civil rights activists, the blacks. So it was a unique movement whereby white women joining hand with all black women and all blacks for one single purpose. So that's a question which was very much interesting for the students of gender studies, but not for others. So it has a profound impact even in education uh, uh, sphere, in representation as well. For instance, in representation in Congress, there were only 19 to 20 women representing in early 1960s only. In education, their share as being, so there are 40% women. They were undergraduates. So if they would graduate more, they would get better opportunities. And if you see in by 1990s, a considerable amount was graduate. We don't have the data. If you can find the data, well and good. I don't have. I didn't find any data relating to this argument. But it's a very relevant argument. So, but that was a question which was specifically for gender study students. But the rest of the students uh, would find it difficult, or they would correlate it with the voting rights and stuff like that. But it's not the case. You have to write the factors with reference to modern feminism. One factor was derived out of the industrial advancements, job creation, and the second factor from the academic side from Betty Friedan, and that would be sufficient. If you want to expand it, go for it, but do not deviate from the topic, or you can say from the question. So it is very much relevant and important. Now, coming toward the next question, it's again a very easy question, not a big deal, and you have to write trace the African American struggle for equality. African American struggle for equality. Okay, one part. and how many in highest offices? So I can assume that if I would uh, grant marks or divide this question into marks, so prima facie the highest office 5 to 6 marks, and 15 to 14 to 15 marks for struggle for equality. Now, struggle for equality by African Americans do not go for civil war. Civil war was not a struggle by African Americans. The question says critically trace the struggle, the African American struggle for equality, the way they struggled. Civil war was not a struggle of the African American community. Rather, that was a political issue of economic issue or political and economic issue of slavery. African Americans were not directly part of the Civil War unless the last year where slaves were allowed to fight war. Slaves or the blacks were not allowed to fight war. गोरा ही गोरा के खिलाफ लड़ा. आखिरी साल में आके फिर लिंकन ने कालों को जो फ्री काले थे उनको और जो हेलिंग फ्रॉम मैरीलैंड एंड कंटेटी वो साथ थे यूनियन के तो उनके साथ. So the struggle for equality, there are two phases of struggle for equality. One phase is from 1865 up till the end of progressive movement. You can say till World War one phase. And the second phase is definitely civil rights movement immediately after World War II. So these were the two dominant phases that the struggle for equality. Whatever happened here, you would give examples of Du Bois, African American Colored People Association, and a number of other incidents. And civil rights movements, you would come across with their legal board versus, Brown versus Board of Education. Then there was a lady, Rosa Parks versus Alabama State, and stuff like that. The role of Martin Luther. So you would highlight the struggle for equality by African Americans. Do not mix it with, do not make it a historical, grand historical narrative or civil war or the issues of slavery. No, you have to African American struggle. And as far as the highest office is concerned, so it's a era of internet. You can search it out. You will find it out that the presidents. Okay, it was one president, Barack Obama. You have to provide a list. That's it. Don't go in detail, but specifically you must know that when he was president, then after president, the senators. As far as my limited understanding is concerned, so far, so as 9 to 10 Black Americans or African Americans, you would say, not the Black African Americans, 9 to 10, they become senators. Their names and their, you know, Obama is also included in this, and your most recent vice president elect from California seat, she is also a senator right now. So after coming to Senate, do not go for House of Representative. It's a long list of more than 200 people whomsoever served in, not 100 people, sorry, around 100 people who have served as blacks. Don't go for it. But Secretary of States, of course, you can give Secretary of States, and it's Colin Powell, then Condoleezza Rice, important examples. Even Chief Justice. There are judges. There are two judges. One judge was Marshall, and the other one is still in the Supreme Court. I just forgot his name. Is still in Supreme Court of United States of America. You may also give names of governors, but do not go uh, other than this. It's a list you would come across that in 8 to 9 senators, write down 5 to 6 names of the senators. If you want to write down 5 to 6 name of the House of Representative. It's available. I would upload this video on YouTube and also share the link of the details that who have served in which capacity in which capacity. So it's quite an easy question. I don't think that so far and so good. Question number 2, 3, and this one 5. Of course, 4 was a very specific question. These are very easy questions, and it's not textbook style question, but examiner wanted to see that how would students come up uh, with their opinion, and if they would confront some out of box questions. So do they have the ability to write out of box matlab, these are not answers to these questions are not available in any specific text or any specific textbook. So here it is again. Next question. It's a very interesting question, but a bit difficult as well. Trace the reasons of US economy augmentation in the post World War II era. US economy witnessed a boom immediately after World War II. I've already discussed that in 1939, the US economy, its total GDP of the US economy in 1939 was, something near 200 billion dollars in 1939, only $200 billion. In 1950, it's reached $500 billion, and in 1960s, it reached 300 and then $500 billion. So definitely, United States become one of the most rich and powerful nations across the globe by early 1960s. So immediately after World War II, economy was very efficient and effective. Another manifestation that when Great Depression started, their unemployment rate reached up to 25%. Even when the World War II started, unemployment rate was somewhere in between 10 to 14 floating. But after World War II, it would shock you that unemployment rate was less than 2%. That's the best ever in the United States history. So that's a good one, that American economy was flourishing, and it was flourishing, quite well. So how all this happened? The question is about this, trace out the reason. How all this happened? It was first thing first that it was owing to the policies of Democrat Party, convincing people to save. People used to save 20% of their earnings during the era, the phase of World War II. Overspending was strictly, controlled, because the policy of rationing was very much there during World War II. People can't spend more. Money factor. Immediately after World War II, when industries started working, and people, because they were saving money since long, so they have the money to buy. So capita floated. The flow of capita. That's the strength of an economy. So people have the money, and then it happened. So this is one important thing, the policies of Democrat parties that are very essential. But on the other side, Economists were also very skeptical because bulk of the industry during the in the Cold War and a couple of years before the World War and before World War, they were focusing largely on arms, ammunitions, and the question that civil industry, how to develop civil industry after World War II, that was a big deal. But uh, all the predictions of the economist, they just vanished, they just disappeared. Reason so, because of the Democrat Party, they controlled overspending of the people. People have the money. People were saving money. United States of America, after Cold War, immediately after Cold War, you would come across that the common goods like uh, coffee, sugar, meat, butter, milk, vegetables, stuff like that. So all these things, and they were produced in a massive at a massive scale. There was a fear that it would result into underconsumption, overproduction. But again, due to the effective policies of Democrats, that people have money, so people started buying. This buying and this flow of capital, one can amply understand that some 90%, sorry, 90% can, some 75% of the Americans in 1955 they owned a car. 75% of the American households they owned a car. By 1965, you would say that automobile industry they produced within the year of 1965 they produced 11 million cars, trucks, buses, other vehicles. So people were buying. Saying the automobile industry was providing 1/6 of the all employment. It's up to that level. So all such developments are linked with the policies of Democrats, which is very much quite interesting. And all these things have been mentioned in the book of, you know, I recommend that book, The Unfinished Nation by Alan Brinkley. So just visit that chapter, United States in the post, immediately after post World War II. And then and there is another factor that was external. Whole of the Europe was eyeing towards United States. United States were producing 50% of the global output, 33% of the global exports, because European markets were not capable enough at that time. Then the impact of Marshall Plan. They supported Western Europe, provided them money so that they can effectively buy, purchase American products as well, and they can strengthen their economy. So, domestic policies as well as the external factor effectively paved the way towards their consolidation. But not to forget that the industry linked with arms, ammunitions, it didn't stop because of the impact of Cold War. Cold War started. So that you can say the military industrial areas, they also witnessed a boom. There was no stoppage. So all these factors paved the way towards an economic boom in US economy. This was a very specific question, like that of modern feminism. But at the end of the day, you are not supposed to answer all questions in the paper. You have to attempt 4 questions in the paper. If I would sit in that paper, I would definitely go with the 3 questions. Question number 2 of the comparison of two treaties. Question number 3 of Stamp Act and its consequences or repercussions. Question number 5, African American struggle and how many rose to the highest offices. These are very easy, relatively easy questions. Now the next two questions, I don't think so that a serious student cannot comprehend or write over these two questions. Next question is relatively outdated, and it is out of question to develop an outline on an outdated question. That was new US Afghan policy. It was way back in 2018 paper. The policy was introduced in 2017. May push Pakistan towards China. Assess the observation in perception of the current deteriorating Pak-US relations. So this question is not relevant to our contemporary context. However, the Afghan US in Taliban US deal in the dying days of February 2020, that may be important. That deal. They may ask question. So I would humbly request that try to read it from its legal perspective. Legally, it's a very weak agreement. It is a contradiction with BSA and SOFA signed by the Afghan government with BSA with US, SOFA with NATO. It's a contradiction to that agreement. So it's highly unlikely. And then Afghan government is not party to this whole deal. And then it focused merely on a comprehensive ceasefire. There is no, when you are when you are engaged in a dialogue with a non-state actor, it's a political actor or a terrorist actor or whatsoever. So that actor must surrender weapons first, and then the process of dialogue uh, might be successful. But in the case where is merely a ceasefire and then you are uh, concluding a deal or an agreement, that's not sensible. So examiner may ask pertaining to Afghan uh, Taliban US deal if he or she wishes to, but that very question is outdated question now. So I don't find it relevant in contemporary context. Afghan deal and then option for Pakistan. Yes, that may be the case, and that's possibility. Last question. If you expect any teacher to write an outline for you for the last question of this paper, then God may help you. Then it means that you are not a potential and serious student of CSS. Write an inclusive note on the beginning and end of Cold War. I don't know the answer of this question. It's a quite easy question here. You must have the capacity to write it down pertaining to containment and US context, but write it in US perspective. Last time around, I have recommended the book. Do read that book. And this is all for today, Ji. And I would request you to, I would upload it on YouTube as well. I would request you to share it to your friends and maximum share it to the different, forums so that maximum students can get help. Thank you very much, Ji. We will upload the next paper of 2019 tomorrow.